Good evening and welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm your moderator, Linda Laurel. For those of you who are longtime viewers, you will notice some changes to our show. We've added some elements that we feel will improve the discussion and continue to keep Red, White, and Blue on the cutting edge of political talk here in Houston. We begin tonight by discussing the firestorm that Missouri Representative Todd Akin ignited with his legitimate rape comment. Representative Akin came under fire when he made it clear that his opposition to abortion is nearly absolute, including instances of rape. Akin went on to state that, and I'm quoting here, "If it's legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down. But let's assume that maybe that didn't work or something. I think there should be some punishment, but the punishment ought to be of the rapist and not attacking the child." Well, tonight we ask, what impact could Akin's abortion comments have on the presidential race, as well as on local campaigns? And should abortion rights determine the next president? So what are the different points of view on this sensitive and politically charged topic? We've turned to some of the brightest, most connected minds in our community to share their perspectives. We begin this evening with conservative blogger, wife, and mother of three, Reese Murphy. Reese?
Thank you. First of all, Akin's a moron, and I wish he would have quit the race, because that was a really bonehead thing to say and to believe, for that matter. But as far as it impacting the greater federal races, I don't believe it will. It's more of one of those magician tricks where you try and get everybody to look at one hand, this controversy, this idiot Akin, versus what's really going on the other hand that's meaningful, and that is the jobs, the economy, and the prices of our commodities.
All right, thank you very much, Reese. And now sharing her perspective is Houston trial lawyer Jan Fox. Jan.
Thank you. I think it's astounding, and really appalling, that we're even having this conversation in 2012. But first of all, yes, of course it's going to be determinative, because it's at the heart of the real economy of our country. 18.5% of our citizens are women between the ages of 18 and 45 in their most productive years. They're trying to make family decisions, planning decisions. We know that 1/2 of all pregnancies are unintended, and that 1/2 of those unintended pregnancies are currently terminated by abortion. We know that it costs $300,000, according to the 2008 census, to raise a child from birth to 17 years old for a middle-class family making $49,000 a year. Who in the world do we think is going to be able to pay for that for those children if we lose the right to abortion? But we also know that the law in Texas and the law in other states now is pushing us into a situation where we have to face these hard economic realities. Women will get abortions. That will happen some way or the other. But the point is, if we're going to keep our country strong, we've got to keep our most productive citizens productive and able to make choices.
All right, thank you very much, Jan. And finally now, commenting this evening, political activist and freelance writer Margot Ellen Gilman. Margot?
Yes, well, first of all, I think this issue is actually a form of manipulation for women's votes. Secondly, I believe that abortion will exist with or without a turnover of Roe versus Wade. It existed long before that determination was made several years ago, except at that time there was the TWA abortion. That's the one where you got on a TWA plane and flew to another country to have the abortion. Of course, that was the one that the wealthy people used. And then there were the less fortunate, the people who wanted to terminate a pregnancy and did not have the option. Thus, they went to the back alley and found a nice little low place where there was an hanger or some other ridiculous type of tool used.
All right, thank you very much. You've all given us something to think about as we really begin our discussion. And now it's time for me to introduce our guest this evening, President of the Board of Directors of NARAL Pro-Choice Texas, Lillian Ortiz. Also with us, Chairman of We Texans, Deborah Medina. And in their 12th season with Red, White, and Blue, our hosts, Gary Polland and David Jones.
I don't like to hear the number 12 as it relates to you. I mean, except for your IQ, Lo. I mean, that sometimes works.
Thanks a lot, David. I appreciate that. But I would actually, we have two very accomplished guests. I studied before I went on the air today the list of issues of concern to the American people. Top 10. You know where abortion is? Nowhere to be found. My belief, and I want to get your reaction, is this is all just a giant distraction from the real issues this country faces. Yes? No? What do you think, Deborah?
Absolutely. Distraction.
Why?
Americans are inundated with debt and government spending. We know that's the problem. It's one that our elected officials don't want to address. It is the core issue. We like to call it the economy. That kind of makes it nebulous. It's really about government spending and monetary policy. How much are we spending and where are we getting the money from? That drives this economy or doesn't drive it, as is the case today. And anything that elected officials can do to take our eye off of that ball kind of takes the responsibility for this mess, this wreck that we're in, off of their shoulders.
Lillian, do you really feel we're in a situation where a woman's right to choose is under direct threat? I mean, Roe versus Wade's been around forever, right? So do we really think that this is what this election is going to determine from your standpoint?
I think this is an issue that's important, and I think what's happening is that, one, women are waking up and realizing that this right is under attack. Women are under attack. I think it's very typical for the conservative right to say this is an issue, this is a distraction, because, of course, it has to do with women. It has to do with poor women. These are the kinds of things that the conservative right doesn't ever want to deal with, because these are issues that affect a group of the population that our conservative leaders are not really concerned with. And I do think it's an issue, and I do think it's an important issue, because it's not just abortion, it's women's reproductive health, it's health care, it's the well-being of families, and it's the ability of women to make decisions with their doctors, with their families, that affect them without having government intrusion, which, by the way, is being led by a group of conservatives who say, we want less government, we want smaller government, we don't want to spend on this. But yet when it comes to my yearly exam with my doctor, for some reason Republicans seem to think that they're allowed in the room.
And you've been in the legislative session, so you know something about two things that the rest of us are probably not as up to date on, and that is the defunding of Planned Parenthood and what the numbers are of women are that might have been disadvantaged because of that funding issue, and the sonogram bill that was recently passed, or the sonogram test procedure. Can you tell us where those two laws stand in terms of the legalities as well as the practicalities, if you will?
Well, I think it's defending of Planned Parenthood, but it's defending of access to health care for women in Texas, and poor women again. Somebody mentioned earlier, wealthy women will always have access to reproductive health care. That's not a question that has happened throughout time. We are talking about middle class, lower middle class, working poor, women and their families who rely on programs like the Women's Health Program, which basically was a service of reproductive health services and family planning for women who, if they became pregnant, would qualify for Medicaid. We pay for too many Medicaid births already. The federal government was paying 90% of that bill. In the decision that our state leaders have made, they've said, we don't want the federal money. Even though I, as a federal taxpayer, am putting money into that, my money is not coming back to my state to serve this population. What's happening is that you're endangering the well-being of these women and families, that you're putting them in a situation where, again, these women are trying to survive, maybe have 2 or 3 jobs, rely on this assistance in order to make appropriate decisions in terms of family planning. Then you have the sonogram bill, which again is an invasion into the relationship between doctor and woman. You are making women have a transvaginal sonogram, which I believe you've had Representative Carol Alvarado on the show before, and she's talked about. It's not the procedure everybody thinks. It's not the jelly on the belly. It's an invasive procedure. If it was medically necessary, it was already being done. That was a decision physicians were making on a case-by-case basis. Women are now being forced to have that, view the sonogram, hear a heartbeat. All of those were optional as it was. We did not need our legislature to come and tell us that we absolutely have to do that. Women know what they're doing when they go into a clinic. They know how to make these decisions with their doctors. There's no room for that.
Well, Deborah, wasn't there a concern among conservatives in the legislature that women actually weren't getting the full picture when they were sold a bill of goods on how wonderful an abortion is?
True. But the problem here, I think, is that we put into the government realm things that shouldn't be government. This isn't about whether or not women should have access to health care. Of course they should. The question is who provides that care, and is it government sponsored? Government cannot, has never, will never provide access to high quality health care. We have got to recognize, and conservatives frankly have to do a better job of making that argument, that there is a very real need in a free and prosperous society for a healthy free market, for families and individuals and businesses to thrive, for churches and civic organizations to be intimately involved with what goes on in their community, so that those who are maybe hurting and who are needy get the assistance. But it ought not be coming from government, and we are spinning ourselves into oblivion by trying to turn to government for every need that we have. And so I think to characterize Republicans as heartless and not caring about women's health is another distraction. As a mother, as a wife, as a registered nurse, I absolutely care about those things. I just think the solutions, frankly, that we're offering and in our state, led by Republicans for the last 10 years, we've missed the boat. We are not focusing on the private sector as we should be to figure out how do we unshackle that healthcare community so that they can meet these needs. And when we start to have that discussion, and we start to have it in the state of Texas, then we'll see real improvement in health outcomes and real improvement in the ability to meet the needs of these women. This is not a federal issue. It's something that we ought to be taking care of in Texas, and we ought to, frankly, be having more discussion about the free market.
I hate to disagree with my fellow from Wharton County, Deborah Medina, but I have to ask her. I mean, government. There are people that want government to tell you right now what you should do when you go see before you have a procedure that is guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. That's in the platform of the Republican Party. No exceptions for anything.
I've got to grab the guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States, because, let's bring it in on that part.
We don't get to decide what constitutional law is. Other people do. It's now the law of the land. Somebody wants to tell you that it shouldn't be in a government platform, a government-based campaign. Doesn't that trouble you? The order that a doctor has to use the probe, Ms. Medina.
Yes, it troubles me. I think that there are many conservatives who have said this is not a federal issue. Roe v. Wade should not have been a federal issue. If we were serious about states' rights, if we were serious in Texas about protecting the life of the unborn, we would make this a states' rights issue. Texas would decide definitively when we believe life begins. Our law today in Texas says life begins at fertilization. That's an interesting term. We don't hear that often anymore, but our law today says life begins at fertilization. And the taking of that life is murder, except if you're a doctor or the mother. That seems an unusual exception to me. We expect government to protect innocent life. There's none more innocent than that unborn baby. And while I'm sympathetic to that woman in an unplanned pregnancy, very sympathetic, I'm also very sympathetic to that innocent child who needs the government's protection, who ought to enjoy the protection of its life until it's born.
Ms. Ortiz, is that your understanding of the law in the state of Texas?
I think
when did we escape the federal Constitution?
I don't think we have. And I think that one of the things that I have never been able to completely understand when it comes to the conservative argument on these issues is this concern that everyone claims to have about this unborn child and the child should, have all of these rights. Conservatives are the first ones to abandon the children as soon as they're born. Conservatives are the first ones to cut CHIP programs and Medicaid programs and preschool programs and everything that would help a family in need. If we were working with a level playing field in this country, if people were born into the same situations financially, in terms of family values, in terms of having parents who were there to take care of you, we could have a different kind of conversation, but we don't. Saying that we need to have government completely get out of healthcare and that the poor people can just fend for themselves and somehow the private sector is going to come through, that's a ridiculous assertion. I work with private philanthropy every day, and one of the things that they're constantly telling me is we cannot take care of this problem on our own. That is not something that we're equipped to do. So I think this idea that somehow if you get government out of everything, again, except my yearly exam with my gynecologist, we're going to solve these problems is ridiculous. A quarter of our kids in Texas live in poverty. Those families live in poverty. The majority of women who have an abortion are already a parent to at least one child. They are not taking this lightly. They are not doing this because they just want to go out and have abortions. We live in a society that does not support our women, does not support our families. And until we start doing that on the front end and being proactive about what we present as options to our community, we cannot sit here and then go tell a woman, you cannot have an abortion, you cannot get birth control. Well, that doesn't make sense to me.
Here's the problem with what you're saying, Lillian, and that's you've had a President Obama in Washington, who's liberal, who agrees with you on almost everything you've just said. Mm-hmm. And the country's about $15 trillion in debt because this president has spent more than any president in the entire history of America in terms of debt. Anybody else. So I don't know where all this money is coming from, all these wonderful things you want to have government do, but you have done a very good job of explaining the fundamental issue in this election. And that's between those who believe government should be all things to all people and those who believe that actually this country is based on individuals, citizens doing for themselves. That's a fundamental question. But I want to ask you this. Obama's abortion position is in fact very extreme, and I'm going to show you how. Out of step with the American people. 72% of the American people oppose public funding for abortion. Okay? 86% oppose late-term abortion. 90% oppose partial birth abortion. And in between in that percentage oppose abortion for sex selection. Okay? So there's a significant number of the American people, majority, who don't like that. Now, I'd also say, to be fair, majority of the American people think abortion should be available in the case of the physical health of the mother or rape or incest, because that's what the polls show. So the Obama position over here, Republicans here, maybe the actual position is somewhere in between, but it's not the issue of this campaign.
Maybe she can tell us when Obama was for sex selection. I don't remember.
Well, he's for abortion on demand. He's essentially for abortion on demand, David.
I think he's for a woman's choice. I don't think anyone is pro-abortion. I don't think anyone is saying women go out and have all the abortions that you can. That's a ridiculous assertion that I've heard from the right several times. I think what he's saying is he respects his wife and his daughters enough to stand up for them. He respects me enough to stand up for me. He respects the women of this country enough to stand up for us and say, it is a woman's decision to decide when, if, how she becomes a parent. It is a woman's decision as to what she discusses with her doctor. We are looking at Texas now with our Department of State Health Services trying to essentially muzzle our physicians and telling them, if you participate in certain programs with us, you are not allowed to talk to a woman about her full range of options. That, I think, is what President Obama is about. He's about women having the information they need.
So now you have a concern that women who go see their doctors don't know what their options are? Are you serious? You think that people come in and don't know? Oh, I guess you read these stories. Women who have a baby while they're going to the bathroom and never knew they were pregnant. I guess that's possible.
We don't have sex education in schools, do we?
I find it hard to believe.
We don't have sex education in schools.
That they don't know that an abortion is one of their options that they now have under not the Constitution, but under the Supreme Court's ruling in Roe v. Wade.
There are plenty of women who are just surviving. They're struggling to survive. They're working 2-3 jobs. They're raising children. They're taking care of their families. They don't have the luxury that I have to sit and read articles and go to conferences. We live in a society where we have the haves and the have-nots, especially in this city, in this state. One of the things that I think we need to realize is that, again, we are not all coming out in a level playing field. So to say women already know their options, they don't. Some of them don't. Some of them do. But we need to allow doctors to be able to give the information that they need to give their patients as they see fit.
What is the Human Life Amendment all about, Ms. Medina? And because I understand that's in the Republican platform, would it make the people who are responsible for an abortion murderers? Is that your understanding of the Human Life Amendment that the Republicans are asking that we pass in the Congress? Just how extreme can we go with this? I mean, you know right now that a woman in the military right now who is raped, okay, TRICARE will not pay for the procedure that she can use to protect herself against that. I mean, that's how extreme things are getting.
I understand, but two things. It's a distraction. We've been debating abortion in this country for 40 years. And that debate is not going to go away. The real issue here is a $15 or $16 trillion deficit and what the government is responsible for. Liliana has mentioned that we're not on a level playing field. We never were about equal outcomes. We were about equal opportunity in this country. Our policies are driving people to make irresponsible decisions. We've got to get back to that messaging, that this nation is prosperous because of freedom, because people are allowed to make bad choices and live with the consequences of those choices. An innocent child should not be the victim, and abortion policy allows that child to be victimized. We ought to stand in defense of that poor child, of that innocent child. We ought to ensure that our policy allows a free market so that we can care for in the community, in the church, and in the family for that unwanted child through adoption, through community services, but not through government.
When did we get it right in the United States on the issue that we're talking about? I mean, when was it being done correctly? Founding fathers? Is that, you go back to that era and say, you know, they wrote the Constitution, they should know about, life, and so let's live with whatever it is that they were thinking about at the time?
You know, I don't know what the best answer to that question would be. I know my whole adult life we've had this debate that I don't think has really moved us anywhere over whether or not we're pro-choice or pro-life. What we have done in that period of time is driven ourselves to the brink of bankruptcy as a country. We've driven ourselves to a place where the numbers quoted here today are atrocious, the number of abortions that are occurring in our country. We've lost a whole generation to this policy. It's bad policy. It doesn't help our country. It certainly doesn't help the women who go through the procedure. I think it's time that we really revisit, not just looking at our good intentions, but looking at the real outcomes of some of these policies, revisit those policies, and maybe move away from having the same argument and begin to consider some other options. Private sector, free market health care meets those needs. It also begins to address the excess of government spending that's going on in our country.
You know, I don't hear anyone making that argument in the national campaign, so I guess maybe we can all agree that the candidates and the parties right now are not really, Lillian, you can answer this too, are not really leading with this issue so much. How do you get this issue in front of women so that they make the choice you want them to make in November this year?
You know, I think that we go back to, saying that this is a distraction. I find that a little bit offensive because I think women's health is not a distraction. It's an important issue. I think that welfare of families is an important issue. So I do think that we have a situation right now with Representative Akin and his comments and some other things that have come out here in the state of Texas where women are realizing my right to make healthcare decisions for myself is in jeopardy. And I do think that that is something that is coming out. So, perhaps because of some of the things that have happened recently, this issue has come to light, but it's been an issue for years. And I think that we finally got to the point where this conversation is being had. It's being had by a lot more people. I worked in the legislature for years. We were dealing with this every single session. The issue was the community at large didn't necessarily know what was going on until these really bad things actually passed. And with the sonogram bill, with the defending of the women's health program, you start to get interest that you didn't get before. And I think that's a healthy thing because women and men need to realize what this might do to their families.
But it's still a financial issue because women with money and women with insurance, they're not worried about this. So I'm guessing.
Well, I'll tell you, David, what they're worried about, and the women are worried about the fact.
I heard that.
No, unemployment. 858,000 women lost their jobs under President Obama. Black female unemployment 13.3%. Hispanic female unemployment 10.8%. Women account for 92.3% of the jobs lost under Obama. Isn't that the real issue? We don't get this economy going. We're not going to have to worry about abortions, women's health, defense, welfare payments, anything. It's all over. That's the issue. And that's what this election should be determined on, isn't it? Don't you all agree with me?
The economy is an issue, and it should be something we're talking about. What I'm saying is saying that women's health doesn't matter or is a non-issue. I don't think that's a fair thing to say.
What I'm saying is none of else matters if we can't get this economy right. Obama's had 4 years to do it, Lillian, and he hadn't done it.
That's a political
You wouldn't
question.
renew it. You wouldn't renew. You don't renew someone who's failed.
George W. Bush had 8 years, and
well, you may argue George Bush shouldn't have gotten renewed either. But my argument today is Obama should not be renewed. He hasn't earned 4 more years. Deborah?
Got to focus on government spending and the economy, no question.
No matter who wins, actually.
No matter who wins. In the U.S. and in Texas.
I'm glad that Miss Medina didn't go all the way back to the Founding Fathers for that argument she made, because I recently read where they thought a woman only got pregnant back then if the womb was delighted. So we have evolved.
No, some people still think that.
Yes, I understand. Lillian Ortiz, thank you so much. Deborah Medina, and this is an issue that is not going away. I promise you, when we're back in 12 more years, Linda, we'll still be talking about abortion.
Most definitely. Thank you to our guests. Thank you, Gary and David. And thank you for watching. And remember that you can catch Red, White, and Blue every Friday at 7:30 p.m. and again on Sundays at 12:30 p.m. We invite you to visit us online at HoustonPBS.org and like us on Facebook. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night.